Hey there, bibliophiles and those raising bibliophiles. Without ratings and warning labels, knowing which books are appropriate for your children to read is like navigating wild terrain without a map and a compass. I don't know about you, but I have been burned more than once handing my child a book that I thought was clean and appropriate for them to read. I'm a fellow mom, educator, reading specialist, and literary enthusiast trying to find great books for my children and yours to read. So if you're looking for a real review from a mom with a biblical worldview, then welcome and enjoy this week's book review. So this week's book review is another Katherine Rundell novel. This is Cartwheeling in Thunderstorms, and it is a wonderful story about Wilhelmina Silver, who has grown up in the bliss, bounty, and adventure of Africa. But after a sad turn of events, she must now learn to survive in London at a boarding school. Rundell does a wonderful job of spending roughly about the first 70 pages of the novel building out Wilhelmina's story and backstory in Africa, her world. The reader is truly immersed in the beauty of her world, how she perceives life, and all the strong bonds that she has with a young man named Simon, her father, and then Captain Brown. Like I have been doing, I'm going to read a little bit of the opening to you just to give you an idea of the story and the writing style. Wilhelmina knew that there were some houses that had glass in every window and locks on the doors. The farmhouse in which she lived was not one of them. If there was a key to the front door, Wilhelmina had never seen it. It was likely that the goats that wandered in and out of the kitchen had eaten it. The house was at the end of the longest of the farm roads in the hottest corner of Zimbabwe. Her bedroom window was a square space in the wall. During the rain, she sewed plastic bags to make a screen and stretched it across the frame. During the heat, the dust blew in. Years ago, a visitor to the farm had asked Will about her window. "Surely your father can afford a pane of glass." "I like to be dusty," she had said, "and wet. Dust and rain made mud. Mud was full of possibilities." The farm roads were bald and red with the settled dust. They were walked daily by Captain Brown, owner of the farm, driven daily by William Silver, foreman of the farm, and ridden daily by Wilhelmina, William's only child. Wilhelmina rode better than any boy on the farm because her father had known that to ride before you can walk is like drinking from glass bottles of Coke underwater, or hanging by the knees from a baobab tree, disorienting and delicious. So Wilhelmina grew up running under horses' bellies, tripping up into horse manure, and tugging handfuls of her long dark hair when horseflies stung. The horse boys, living in the tin-roofed cottage in the staff quarters, never wept at horseflies. Sometimes they swore in a leisurely, laughing way in Shona. And Wilhelmina was sure that she was the equal of any boy. She was faster than most of the boys her age on foot, too. And she was many other things. When the men on the farm talked about her in the evenings, they needed handfuls of ands to describe her. Will was stubborn, and exasperating, and wild, and honest, and true. And that sort of gives you just a little bit of the opening for the first chapter in the story. Obviously, kind of continues from there. Wilhelmina, also known as Will in the story, that's sort of her nickname. Her father, William Silver, who is the foreman and manager of Captain Brown's farm. Will's mother died when she was 5 from malaria, and sort of since then, Will has pretty much been a wild beauty about the land. Without a feminine influence for herself or even the household, Will is considered wild as she runs about with Simon and some of the other young farmhands. However, Will is actually just full of life and wonder. She truly appreciates the beauty of nature and all that it has to offer. Unfortunately, her father becomes ill with malaria, just like her mother had. Cynthia Vinci comes to care for him. She is sort of like a nurse, but tending to his needs really isn't her priority. She is seeking to get Captain Brown's attention in his heart. She knows that there is a potential of wealth at the farm, and so she's kind of a little bit of a gold digger in that. And then ultimately, through a sad turn of events, Will does die. Will's father dies, William. And then Cynthia manages to marry Captain Brown within a week. And then that ultimately forces Will out of the farm and to a boarding school for girls in London. Captain Brown is heartbroken by the decision to send Will away and only comes to accept the decision after Cynthia threatens to leave him if he will not kind of go along. Cynthia does end up putting the farm up for sale, and as a little bit of justice towards the end of the novel, the readers do learn that Captain Brown has sold the farm to the farmhands much less than it was worth. So much to Cynthia's chagrin of trying to marry him to get the wealth from the farm, it didn't quite work out the way that she had hoped. Once at the boarding school, Will is bullied almost mercilessly by two girls, Samantha and Louisa. She's called many names such as savage and midget because she's sort of undersized. It isn't long until Will decides to run away, especially one evening when the girls force her with her school uniform and everything on, like into a cold water bath. Now, she hasn't bathed in the 2 weeks that she's been there. And so with the travel and her past experience, I'm sure, as the story talks about how smelly she was, but that definitely gives no excuse to the bullying that takes place. So it's also the midst of winter, and Will puts on her original clothes that she still had with her, which were shorts, a cardigan, and some boots. She leaves out of a window, and then she spends several adventurous nights in London streets before a young boy, Daniel, and his grandmother sort of give her the proper care that she needs. And there's a lot that kind of happens in between some of that. She goes to a zoo, she's wandering the streets, she ends up in what she thinks is a museum, but is actually a store. And in the end, she does return to the boarding school with determination to learn how to basically cartwheel in thunderstorms with the promised visits of Daniel and his grandmother. So to Will's surprise, she is swept up by the headmistress who does care for her, and shortly friendship with two twins does begin to emerge at the end of the story. Even Samantha apologizes for her previous behavior. In the end, the story does end on a hopeful note about courage and bravery and using the struggles in life to help build perseverance and endurance. If you go to my website at holdingsteadfastreaders.com, you're going to get a few more details of some great quotes, maybe some things that you may just want to be aware of as far as language. I really enjoyed the story. I really enjoyed the themes. It's very fast paced. And like I said, I love that the author did a very good job that she didn't move too quickly through the story. This really is a story focused on Will and her story and her struggle, and the fact that she builds out for a good portion of the story, about a third of her life in Africa, what that was like. Just all of that and her relationships, and then having that sort of transition, you can kind of feel for Will, and if she had moved too quickly through some of that, you would have lost that real connection with the character. And so that is Cartwheeling in Thunderstorms, and by Katherine Rundell. And hopefully that is helpful to you as a parent as you are trying to find things that are clean and appropriate and worthwhile for your children to read. And I hope that you will join me next week for another book review.